There are places in this world that exist at the edge of everything, where the land runs out, where the ocean takes over, where the last light before open water belongs to a single tower of stone, standing alone. No neighbors, no roads, no way in or out except by sea, just the lighthouse, and whoever is inside it. My cousin Nate has been in the Coast Guard for over a decade. He is not a man who exaggerates. He is not superstitious. He does not believe in ghosts or legends or things that go unexplained. He is practical, grounded, the kind of man who fixes things with his hands and trusts what he can see. He told me this story in the summer of 2022. I asked him to repeat it more than once. Every time, the details stayed exactly the same. This is what happened to Nate in the winter of 2017 at a lighthouse called Matinicus Rock, off the coast of Maine, and whatever happened out there, he will not go back. Not ever. Matinicus Rock is not the kind of place you stumble upon. You cannot drive there. You cannot walk there. You can only reach it by boat or helicopter, and even then, only when the weather permits. It is nothing more than a jagged slab of rock jutting out of the North Atlantic. A single lighthouse tower. One small auxiliary building for fuel and equipment storage. No power grid, no plumbing. Barely any cell signal. Just stone and sea and wind. The lighthouse itself had been automated for years, but automation does not mean the equipment stops needing human hands. Salt corrosion eats through metal. Gears wear down. Electrical systems fail in ways a computer cannot diagnose or fix. So every year or so, the Coast Guard sends a maintenance crew out. Usually it is a solo assignment. But there had been strange electrical failures at Matinicus the year before. Unexplained outages, readings that did not match, logs that did not add up. So this time, they sent two people, Nate and another guardsman named Russell. The first 3 days were exactly what you would expect from 2 weeks on an isolated rock in the middle of the North Atlantic. Windy, cold, monotonous. During the day, they checked the beacon mechanics, tested the emergency batteries, refilled the diesel generator, and scraped layers of salt corrosion from the metal interior of the tower. At night they read. They ate. They played cards by lantern light. No red flags, no unease. Just isolation and the understanding that this was the job. On the fourth night, Nate woke up at 2 in the morning. Not from a sound, not from a dream, from a feeling. He described it as that particular heaviness in the air, the kind you feel when you are standing in a room just before a thunderstorm breaks. That pressure. That held breath stillness that tells your body something is about to change. Except when he looked outside. The sky was completely clear. He sat up in the dark, and then he noticed it. The lighthouse beam was not rotating. That single beam, the one that had been sweeping the water in steady intervals since the moment they arrived, was completely still, dark. A failed lighthouse light is not a small thing. Ships navigate by that beam. Lives depend on it. Nate shook Russell awake and they climbed the narrow spiral staircase to the beacon room at the top of the tower. When they got there, the gears were still turning. The mechanism was running exactly as it should be. But the light was not moving. Something was jammed in the assembly. Nate reached in and pulled it free. A large piece of dark cloth, heavy, soaked through, covered in a slimy, moss-like substance that clung to his hands. It smelled like rotting seaweed, like the deep ocean floor, like something that had been sitting underwater for a very long time. They stood there looking at it. The beacon room door had been locked from inside. Every window in the lighthouse was sealed. There had been no wind strong enough to carry something through. No birds nesting in the mechanism. No explanation. They tossed the cloth out into the night wind and went back to bed. They told themselves it was a strange one-off. Some freak occurrence the ocean had somehow managed. The next night, at almost exactly the same time, Nate woke up. The beacon had stopped again. They climbed the stairs again. and found another piece of cloth jammed into the exact same place in the gear assembly, but this one was different. It was smaller, older, a scarf or something like a shawl. Red fabric, frayed completely along the edges, soaked through with ocean water, and clinging to the weave, tiny crustaceans, still alive, like the cloth had been pulled directly from the sea moments before. Nate said that was the moment things stopped feeling like coincidence. They checked every door, every window, the supply closet, the stairwell. Everything was secured. Everything was locked. And yet, something had gotten in, twice, and left something behind. From that night on, they began blocking the stairwell with heavy equipment crates. After every final check of the beacon room, they locked the door at the top and the entrance at the bottom. They stopped leaving anything to chance. But the lighthouse was already doing something to Russell. It started small. He grew quieter, more withdrawn. He stopped initiating conversation. He sat at the window for long stretches of time, staring down at the rocks below, saying nothing. On the seventh night, Nate woke to the sound of Russell murmuring. Not talking to Nate, not in his sleep, just talking. Toward the corner of the room, slow, disconnected sentences. Like someone answering questions only he could hear. Nate leaned up and asked what he was saying. Russell blinked. Looked confused. He said he had not been saying anything. Later that same night, Nate found Russell sitting at the window, 3 a.m, knees pulled to his chest, staring down at the water and the rocks below. Nate asked what he was doing. Russell said he thought he had seen someone standing down there the night before, a figure, barely visible, standing at the edge of the rocks, visible for a fraction of a second every time the rotating beam swept past, and then gone when the light moved away. Gone or hidden. After that, Russell deteriorated quickly. He stopped sleeping through the night, stopped eating full meals. He talked about hearing noises inside the walls, voices coming up through the stairwell from the floors below. When Nate asked him to describe what he heard, Russell could not find the words. He just shook his head and went back to the window. On the 9th night, they both heard it. Footsteps, coming from the beacon room above them. Not the usual groaning and creaking of a lighthouse in wind. Not the settling of old stone. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, weighted, one after another, moving across the floor of the room directly above their heads. Nate looked across the room. Russell was standing at the base of the staircase, frozen, staring upward. Nate asked him quietly if he had gone up. Russell said no. Then he asked Nate the same question. Neither of them had moved. They stood completely still and listened as the footsteps moved slowly across the room above, and then stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been. That night, they pushed a heavy dresser against the bedroom door. They slept with knives under their pillows. They did not speak about what they had heard. There was nothing useful to say. 2 nights later, the 11th night, the beacon failed again. They climbed the stairs and found the door to the beacon room wide open. Not unlocked, not ajar. Wide open. Swung fully back against the wall. Like it had been forced from the inside. Wind howled through the open doorway. They stepped inside. The beacon was not just stopped. It had been tampered with. The bulb, industrial grade, the kind that takes real force to turn, had been completely unscrewed and placed upright in the center of the floor, deliberately, carefully, like someone had set it down with intention. Nate stood there looking at it, his mind running through every possible explanation and finding none that held. Then he felt it. Something cold brushed against his back. He spun around. No one. He turned back to Russell. Russell had gone completely white. He was pointing at the far wall. His mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. Then he whispered, "There was a hand. It came out of the bricks. They ran down the stairs, into the bedroom. Door locked, dresser shoved back into place. Nate sat against the wall, eyes open, and did not sleep. Russell sat in the corner of the room and rocked slowly back and forth, whispering to someone who was not there. All night. At first light, Nate picked up the emergency satellite phone and called for an early extraction. He told them there had been a serious mechanical failure. He did not tell them the rest. The boat arrived that afternoon. When the crew came aboard and Nate began explaining the situation, one of the deckhands looked at him strangely. He asked Nate about the distress call they had received at 2:12 in the morning. Nate said nothing. He had not touched the satellite phone until daylight. He had been pressed against the bedroom wall all night with a knife in his hand. The deckhand said the signal had come through heavy static, garbled, broken, but somewhere inside the noise, a voice, saying something about someone being there. Something about not being alone. Then the call had cut out. Russell did not speak the entire journey back to shore. He sat at the back of the boat and stared at the water until Matinicus Rock disappeared below the horizon. A few months later, he quit the Coast Guard. He never told anyone what he experienced out there. Not officially, not informally, not to anyone. Nate still takes maintenance assignments. He still goes out on rotations, still works the equipment, still does the job the same way he always has. But when a new assignment comes in and the name on the sheet says Matinicus Rock, he passes every time, without explanation. There is a lighthouse off the coast of Maine. It sits on a jagged rock in the middle of the North Atlantic. No roads, no neighbors, no way in or out except by sea. The beacon still rotates. It still sends its light sweeping across the water every few seconds, warning ships away from the rocks. And somewhere in the logs of the Coast Guard station on the mainland, there is a record of a distress call received at 2:12 in the morning, from a lighthouse where no one claims to have made it. A voice through static, saying something about not being alone. Some places hold on to things, old storms, old wreckage, old losses swallowed by the sea over generations. Things that do not rest, things that do not leave. And sometimes, when two men are sent out to keep the light burning, those things notice. The light at Matinicus Rock is still turning. What turns it? Nobody knows for certain. If that story sat with you tonight in a way you cannot quite shake, you are not alone. This is a real account. A real lighthouse. A real man who will not go back to that rock, not for any reason. And the distress call at 2:12 in the morning from a phone that no one touched still has no explanation. If you want more stories like this one, real places, real people, real things that happened in the dark and were never fully explained, hit the LIKE button right now, 1 second. That is all it takes, and it tells me you want more. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a new story. Every week, something new. Something that will stay with you long after the video ends. And in the comments below, I want to know, what was the moment in this story that got to you the most? Was it the cloth soaked in seawater, appearing inside a locked room with no way in? Was it Russell, unraveling night by night, whispering to someone standing in an empty corner? Was it the footsteps from the room above, when neither of them had moved? Or was it the call at 2:12 in the morning that Nate never made? Tell me below. I read every single comment. And if you have your own story, a place that felt wrong, a sound with no source, a moment where the explanation ran out, share it in the comments. Because the most terrifying stories in the world are the ones that actually happened. Stay safe out there, keep the light on. And if you are ever offered a solo assignment at a lighthouse off the coast of Maine, think very carefully before you say yes.